Hi, I'm Kelly, and thanks for joining me to learn how to make my Arcturus hat. I chose it to name it Arcturus because I name all my hat patterns after stars, and Arcturus is the brightest star in the constellation Bootes, which is the herdsman, and I felt like this was a bit evocative of, like a traditional Aran type of pattern that a fisherman or a herdsman might wear. So that's where the name came from. And just a quick note on sizing, I chose not to list head measurements on my pattern because I feel like most adults know if they have an average size head or maybe their head's a bit big. Some people like their hats snug, some like them loose. So I am wearing the adult average. I think I have a very average size head. It fits snugly, but it's not tight. It's not having to be stretched in order to fit around my head. It's not going to fall off. At least see the pom-pom flopping. And then the extra large is not much bigger, but you can see it comes down a little lower around my ears, and there's quite a bit more room out here if the person you're making this hat for, whether that be you or a loved one, has a bit bigger head. And I feel like they're going to tell you, like, hey, I have a big head. I can't buy hats in a store. So that's why I chose not to have measurements. The only difference in the sizes is the average uses a smaller hook and the extra large uses a larger hook. And of course the gauge will be a bit different. And of course, everyone prefers their hat a bit looser, a bit tighter. So I feel like this one comes down just about to my ears, which is where I like it to stay warm. So stay tuned and I will show you how to create the Arcturus hat. Thanks for joining me. All right, so let's get started making our Arcturus hat. I'm going to be making the adult average size, so I have a 5.5 hook. I also have a couple stitch markers, tape measure, scissors, yarn needle, and I'm going to show you how to put the pom-pom on at the end. So I have that as well. Of course, I also have my written pattern just off screen here. So to get started, the pattern does call for chaining 4 to count as your first double crochet. 2, 3, 4, and then working your next stitches into this bottom stitch here. So we're going to chain 4 and put 11 double crochets into that first chain. Insert your hook in such a way that you have 2 loops on the top of your hook and 1 on the bottom. And then work 11 double crochets into that same space. If you prefer to use a different method to start the top of a hat, that's absolutely fine. It won't cause any problems at all. And then that chain 3 of the chain 4 at the beginning counts as a double crochet. So we're going to work that chain 3 and then 11 more double crochet for a total of 12. And this does kind of cause an open circle here in the middle, but when you weave in the end, when you're done, you just weave it in around that circle, pulls it right up, you don't notice it at all. So how you choose to begin your circle is personal preference. You don't have to use the method that I've listed in the pattern. Let's see how many I have here. Since I've been talking, I couldn't count. So we're going to count the V's at the top. 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 11, and my chain 3 counts as 12. That was good luck. So we're going to slip stitch into the top of the chain 3. And I have always gotten in the habit of turning my hook backward to grab into that chain 3 because they are kind of hard to work into. I don't really ever see anyone else doing it, but I've been doing it that way since I was a child, and I don't even know if I could not do that after all this time. So there's round 1, and then our instructions say to place a marker around the beginning chain 3 for use in future rounds. So just take your marker and put it around the stitch of the chain 3 there. And we're ready to begin round 2. So we'll chain 1. We'll put 2 single crochets in each stitch around. starting with the same place where we just put our slip stitch. And I always like to put a stitch marker on my first single crochet of a round. Whoops. See, those chain 3s are just tricky to work into, aren't they? So I've got another stitch marker here. I'm just going to put into the single crochet. It makes it easier to see when you come back around at the end of the round. So that's 1 in the first space and our second. And then we're going to put 2 in each one all the way around. If you're unfamiliar with working in the round or single crochet stitches or joining with slip stitch, I do have a lot of other videos that you can reference. For this video, I'm going to mostly assume that you know all the basics and just prefer to follow a tutorial, or maybe aren't sure about the special stitches. But if you need some help, I do go through these stitches a bit slower in some of my other videos. We're almost back around to the beginning, putting 2 single crochet in each stitch around. There's my last one. And I've been crocheting for ages, and I always stop and count at the end of each row just to make sure, because especially now I'm talking to you. If you miss one stitch, it's going to cause problems later. So we can see from the pattern, round 2 should have 24 stitches, so let's count those out. 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 2, 4, 6, 8, 20, 1, 2, 3, 4. Excellent. Got the right number of stitches. We're going to slip stitch in there where we've got our stitch marker. Kind of depending on my yarn and hook and stitch marker style. Sometimes I like to slip stitch in it with the stitch marker still in, and sometimes I don't. It just kind of depends on how I think will be easier. So now we're ready to start chain 3, which is where we're going to start our front post, treble crochet, double crochet pairs. So it starts with a chain 3, 1, 2, and throughout this entire pattern, pull up a little bit extra on that third chain, because when you work your first treble crochet, front post treble crochet, it tends to pull on this last stitch, and it'll make it a lot easier to join later. So we're going to start our first front post treble crochet, double crochet pair. So we'll yarn over twice, work a front post treble crochet around the marked stitch below, which is the chain 3 that we marked in the previous round. Work your treble crochet like usual. And then in a lot of patterns, when you work a treble crochet, or I mean a post stitch, and then it says work into the next stitch, they're assuming that the post stitch is in front of a stitch. That's usually not the next one you work into. But in this pattern, since in our increase rows, our stitches are going to kind of twist and turn, I've chosen not to use that way of indicating which stitch to work into. When I say skip a stitch or work into the next stitch, we're going to count every single stitch that's back here. So we've just executed our first front post treble crochet. Next, we're going to skip a stitch and work a double crochet into the next one. So you can see this is the stitch that our first chain 3 came out of. We're going to skip this stitch and work a double crochet into that one. And there is our first pair. So we'll continue around, work a front post treble around the next double crochet from 2 rows below. Tip it up a bit so you can see the stitch to skip, and work your next double crochet. We'll continue that all the way around. Skip that one, work into that one. And I'm going to pause briefly and work this the rest of the way around. You'll just continue in the same way. Okay, so I have now worked my 11 front post treble crochet double crochet pairs. Probably just going to call those pairs from now on. But you can see here, this chain 3 is going to be the double crochet at the end of the round. So you can kind of count your sets like this. You can see the treble crochet kind of sits forward in space. So we can count our pairs. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. And now we're going to do an ending pair. So we'll do a treble crochet around the next double crochet from below. Skip one single crochet, which you'll see is actually the last single crochet. And then we're going to join to the top of the chain 3 to create that last pair. And then we're going to move our stitch marker from the chain 3 in row 1 up to the chain 3 in the row that we just completed. And now we're going to stop and measure our gauge. If you're doing the adult average, it should be about 2.5 inches. If you're doing the adult extra large, it should be about 3. And mine is maybe a tiny bit under 2.5, but again, these hats are stretchy and heads aren't an exact science, so I feel like that's close enough for me. I'm not going to start over. So we'll move on to row 4. Where we're going to chain 1. We're going to put 1 single crochet in this first single crochet, which is actually in the space where my slip stitch went, which I've been crocheting for I don't even want to say how many years, and I still find it frustrating to work into those chain 3s. Don't feel bad if that's you. I'm going to put in a stitch marker, and then from the next thing we'll do is 2 single crochets in the next single crochet. And we're going to repeat that around. 1 single crochet in the first, 2 single crochet in the next. 1 single crochet, 2 single crochet. And then just follow that around and count at the end to make sure you have 36 stitches. Okay, so I've gone all the way around on row 4. I counted my stitches. I have 36. So I'm going to take out that stitch marker, but keep my eye on where it was at. Slip stitch to join. And now I'm done with round 4. So let's work round 5. This will be our first increase row. So we'll start out with a chain 3, and again, make that last chain a little bigger, make your life happier. And we'll start this the same way that we started the pairs. We'll do a treble crochet, turn it over to locate the stitch you should skip, and do your double crochet there. And then for the increase, we're going to do another treble crochet around the same post. So do your yarn over twice, and I've found I kind of take my pinky finger to pull it forward. Pull that first stitch forward so that you can see the post, that first stitch underneath. Get around that same post and execute the rest of your treble crochet. Now you should see we've got 2 post stitches coming out of that chain 3 from below. And then we're going to make a double crochet in the very next stitch. This time we're not going to skip one. We'll turn it over. We'll see that we have a stitch right here. So we're going to go directly into the next stitch. And that's how you do your increase. And on this one, we're going to do increases all the way around. And be sure whenever you work the stitches from this point forward, you're going to see both the treble crochets, the front post treble crochets, and the double crochets from the row before. We're only ever going to be working around the posts of the double crochets. So just skip these treble crochets every time you see one. So we're going to make our next treble around that double crochet from the row before. Skip a stitch and make our double. And then working behind this post, we're going to make another front post treble crochet around the same double crochet from the row below. So pull that forward a bit with your pinky or however you can finagle your yarn. Work around that same post, but behind the other post stitch. And work another treble in the same spot. And then don't skip a stitch here like we have been, just work directly into the next single crochet. Okay, let's do the next one. Yarn over twice. Well, here, let me point out again. Yarn over twice, ignore the treble crochet from below. Work around the double crochet. Okay. Skip a stitch and work your double crochet. Working behind the treble from that we just made, go around the same post, work your next treble crochet, and work directly into the next single crochet from the row below. And I'll demonstrate that one more time. I'm trying to move my hands around a bit just in case it's easier for you to spot what I'm doing at any particular angle. So I'm going around the double crochet from the row below and working my front post treble. I'm going to turn the yarn over a little bit, or the work over a little bit, so I can see this is the post of the double crochet before coming out of this stitch. We're going to skip that stitch. We're going to work our double crochet into that one. Then we're going to work another front post treble around the same post as this one that we just did. I like to get my pinky in there, pull it forward a little bit so that that double crochet from below is exposed. Yarn over twice and go around that same post. And then going to turn over, we can see that our previous stitch was here. We're going to work into the very next one. So that's what these should look like, and I'm going to go ahead and continue that pattern around. Okay, so I have gone around. I have done all of my increase pairs, and I just kind of want to show you how to read this. You can see here there's the two stitches together coming out of the same post. The pair for one is kind of between them and another kind of over there. So when I'm counting, I kind of hold it like this to count each one. So let's go to the beginning and see what I have here. I'm ignoring this chain 3 because that's going to be the end of the last one. So here's one pair, one increase pair. There's 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, and we're ready to do our ending one. And very eagle-eyed viewers may have noticed that I actually put a stitch in the wrong spot over here, and when I counted, just like I just did, I noticed my mistake. So that shows how even if you've been doing this for a long time, it's important to count. And I find the extra challenge of watching my hands, sometimes in person and sometimes through the camera, an extra bit of challenge there. So no matter how long you've been crocheting, I think it's important to stop and count at the end of every round. So let's do our ending decrease. We'll do our front post treble crochet around the double crochet from below. Skip a stitch and work our double crochet into the next one, which you'll see is the last single crochet of the round before. Work the second post stitch around the same double crochet. and then slip stitch into the top of the chain 3 to end the round. And then we'll move up our stitch marker to the chain 3. And I found when I was working on this pattern, after a little while I could spot that chain 3 pretty easily. So I mean, that stitch marker there is to help you. If you don't find it helpful, then just, skip that part. All right, so ready to do round 6, which is chain 1, 1 single crochet in the first 7 single crochet. See what I mean? You can do this your whole life and still struggle. I'm going to put a stitch marker in that single crochet. I always do that when working in the round. I just find it easier to spot that way. There's 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and then 2 double crochet in the next. And we're going to do that all the way around, and then count your stitches, and you should have 54. All right, I have completed this round. I've counted my stitches. I have 54 as expected. I'm going to slip stitch to join, and we'll be ready to start round 7. Which is another increase round. So we're going to chain 3, pulling that third chain up a little bit extra. And in this round, we're going to work 3 pairs and then 1 increase pair. So we'll work through 1 repeat of that. Ooh, went 2 through many loops there. So there's our first pair. And you can see that stitch kind of hiding out between the 2 trebles from below. So get in there and scoop that guy out. Work around that post. And during the rows like this, I think is when you're going to find that these stitches behind don't lay neatly. They're going to kind of get a bit out of place with regard to where they usually are in space compared to that last post stitch. So that's when it's important to be sure and tip up your work and make sure that you're skipping or not skipping the single crochets correctly. There's 2 pairs. And there's 3 pairs. We can count that because we see the post stitches coming forward in space and the double crochets going backward in space. So there's 1, 2, 3 pairs. Now we're going to make an increase. And again, you can see that double crochet kind of almost hiding behind there. So scoop him out of there. Do your first treble. Skip a stitch and work your double. Oh, I yarned over 1 too many times. Another mistake to watch for. Double. And this is almost an extra bit of challenge because you've got to move this treble crochet forward and your double crochet is kind of captured behind these 2 treble crochets, but just take your time. Pull this current row treble crochet forward with your pinky or however you like. Locate that double crochet that this one is going around. And work another front post stitch right there. Don't skip a stitch this time. And work your next double. And then you can see here we've got a pair. We've got your 2 front post trebles and your 2 double crochets behind. And so we're going to repeat that pattern all the way around. 3 pairs, 1 increase pair. All right, and I am near the end of round 7. I have worked 3 pairs and an increase all the way around. So let's count that. You can see here's my pairs, and here's my increase. All right, so there's 1, 2, 3, increase. 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 1, 2, 3, and we're ready to do my ending increase here. So yarn over twice. Work a front post treble crochet around the last double crochet from below. Skip a stitch and work a double crochet. Pull that one forward and work a second front post treble around the same stitch as the last one. And then we're going to slip stitch to join in the chain 3. And I know this is not a beginner pattern, so probably if you're here you know this, but be sure when you're joining into that chain 3, this stitch here is a lot easier to go into, but that's actually the top of that treble crochet. I think that sometimes beginners either want to go under the chain 3 to join or into this nice open stitch that they see. Remember not to do that. It's best to work under both legs of the V of that chain, but occasionally if I have a chain that I just fight with and I can't get my stitch in properly, I think the most important part is to get it under any 2 legs of the V. Like there you can see that was technically incorrect, but I do have 2 legs of the V on top and 1 on the bottom. And that will hold the integrity of the stitch, and especially in a pattern like this where we're going to work around that chain 3 anyway, I don't think it's going to matter. So don't break your neck trying to get in there. You know, be sure to slip stitch into the chain 3, but you know, it won't matter if you don't do it properly exactly. Anyway, that is round 7, and a tip from me to you where to cut corners sometimes. So round 8, we're going to put 1 single crochet in the first 9 single crochet. I'm going to put my stitch marker. So there's 1. And you can see when I did that incorrectly that this stitch is pulled slightly out of shape, but overall, I don't think it's a big deal. There's 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and 2 here. And while we're talking about little tips, let's show you the best way to count rows. Like if I sat this down now, came back, forgot where I was. If you flip this over onto the back, you can kind of see these ridges. Each one of the ridges that are forward in space is the single crochets, because when we made our post stitches, we pushed those single crochets back in space. And so on the back side, they appear moved forward in space. So I can tell what row I'm on by counting the ridges that are moving towards me. So this is row 2, 4, 6, and this should be 8, which is the one that we're working on now. So that's just a tip to help you count your rows. It's a lot easier than trying to count here, I think, especially when you're on the increase rows and your cables kind of go every which way. So I'm going to complete row 8, which is working 9 single crochet and then 2 in the next, all the way around, and then count to be sure that I have 66 stitches. Okay, so I have completed round 8. I counted, I had 66 stitches, and I slip stitched. And I just want to point out that while this is a bit wiggly because I'm holding it, this piece actually lays quite flat. That's what we want at this point. If your hat is going, you know, quite wiggly, or if it's starting to cup up like that, you might want to start over, check your gauge, maybe consider using a different hook. I do have a video that kind of explains why your piece might be believe I called it potato chipping or cupping or bowling. But basically, if you can just give your piece the lightest of pats and it lays flat, that's what we want for right now. All right, I'm gonna put a little check mark next to round 8 on my pattern, and we're ready to do round 9. Which is our last increase round. And you've probably got it by now, but let's go ahead and work through. So we're going to do our chain 3, work around, work a front post treble crochet around the marked stitch below, skip a stitch, and work a double crochet. Work a front post treble around the next stitch from the row below, 2 rows below. Skip a stitch. And on round 9, we're working 4 pairs and then an increase. So if I count back, I can see I have 1, 2, 3, 4 pairs. And it's time to do the increase. Oops. Skip a stitch and work a double. I was trying to do another triple already. Now I'm doing another triple around that same post. Now I'm working a double in that very next stitch. And I have 1, 2, 3, 4 regular pairs and 1 increase pair. And I'm going to work that all the way around to the end. And then we're going to count to be sure that we have 72 stitches when we're done. Okay, so I've worked most of the way around. We should have 4 pairs and 1 increase around. So let's count. 1, 2, 3, 4, and an increase. 1, 2, 3, 4, increase. 1, 2, 3, 4, increase, and on around. I already counted it. We're ready to do our last ending increase. It's just like all the others. We're essentially leaving off the last double crochet and instead joining to the beginning chain 3. I bet you've got all that by now, don't you? You're a smart crocheter. You're a successful crocheter. You're going to have a great hat in just a few more rounds. All right, so I've just finished round 9, and that's the end of my increases. At this point, like I said, your piece should be laying relatively flat. If it is slightly off, you can probably compensate for that, but if it's, you know, significantly curly, like I said, you might want to back up, start something else with a different hook, and refer back to my videos on the working flat circles to get some tips on that. And if you have any questions, you can leave me a comment in the videos and I'll do my best to get back to you and answer you. I want you to be successful. I really enjoy helping people to learn, and so if it's at all possible for me, I will help you. So round 10, we're just going to do 1 single crochet all the way around. You don't need to watch me do that. I'm going to be right back. I'll make 1 single crochet all the way around and count to make sure I have 72 stitches. All right, so I have just completed round 10, which is my first single crochet round that doesn't have any increases. So I have 72 stitches, and from this point forward, every single crochet row will have 72 stitches unless you decide to do a bit of an adjustment to the pattern. And if you decide that you need to have just a bit more room in your hat, you could do 2 increases on a single crochet round, and then you'll end up with 1 extra pair. Or you could do 2 on a round and end up with 2 extra pairs. That'll give you a bit extra. If you get maybe a couple rows past this point and you realize that your hat is not curving down into a hat shape, you could put 2 decreases on a single crochet row, which would give you 2 less pairs and would help pull it into that hat shape. Because at this point, when we stop doing the increases, maybe a little easier to show you on the one without a pom-pom. We're doing the increases to get it out to here, and then when you start working even, it's no longer increasing out into a flat circle. It pulls down. Gosh, I'm sorry, this is not fitting well on the camera. Let's see if I make it a little bigger. When you stop making the increases for the top, that's when it pulls down into the hat shape. And if you feel like after a few rows it's just not quite pulling down enough, put in 1 or 2 decreases, have 1 or 2 fewer pairs, and that'll snug it up a bit. So let's go ahead and just start round 11. So rounds 10 and 11 are the ones that you're going to repeat until you get to the end, which would be row 26, or if you prefer a little bit longer or shorter. It looks like I forgot to move my stitch marker up, but by this point I bet we can all recognize that chain 3. So we're going to do just a regular pair, another regular pair. And since we're no longer doing increases and decreases, the best thing about these rows is after you get an eye for it, you won't have to necessarily tip up your work to examine quite so closely which stitch you need to skip to put your next double crochet, because they're all going to be laying in the same type of space now. There's no turning or pulling because we're making increases. They're all going to lay the same way. So that post stitch will lay on top of the one you're skipping, and you'll just work right into the next visible one. So that's a nice thing about the rest of this hat. So basically, we've got everything done here. We're just going to keep working the same pattern all the way down until your desired length. And I'm going to stop here because you don't need to watch me go all the way through the exact same thing for another 16 rows. But I do want to show you how I weave in the ends to fill in this hole and how I attach the pom-pom. So I'm going to go ahead and cut my yarn. I'll finish this hat later, but I'll have an extra end, which is sad, but I think it'll work out. So to weave in my ends to kind of hide this hole, I'm going to take my yarn needle and I'm going to go under these stitches, and I usually kind of catch a couple of them and then pull it through. And I don't worry too badly about getting it exactly under every single loop. Just get it under most of them. And you don't have to be perfect about getting under every loop, because this is the inside of the hat. No one but you is ever going to see this. I suppose a recipient could, but it's not too likely now, is it? All right, now I've gone most of the way around that circle. I'm just going to pull it up tight, and that closes up that hole. I know a lot of people just prefer to do a magic loop at the beginning, and that's fine. I just wanted to go, with the chain 3 so that the look of the stitch we were working down into would be consistent through the pattern. So I just weave that all the way around, pull it tight, And then I go back around the other direction to secure the stitches so that end doesn't come loose. And if you really pull the stitches tight, you can even cinch that up a bit more. But since I'm going to be adding a pom-pom, I'm not going to worry about that because I need that stitch. So I've gone back and forth a couple times on those. I can go ahead and snip that out. And let's add on our pom-pom. I make a lot of hats that I donate to the cancer center where I work. And I know a lot of people add their pom-poms by sewing a button on the inside and then looping the pom-pom around the button. I am concerned that a hard plastic button might be painful for a sensitive scalp of a person who is already losing their hair. And so I decided to make a little crochet insert on mine. So I leave a longer tail than normal to start with. Get my loop on my hook and chain 2 or do a magic loop or however you like to start a circle. And I'm going to do about 8 half double crochets because half double crochet is my favorite stitch. Anytime that I'm defaulting to some little stitch, that's the one I like to do. If you like to do single crochets, if you like to do double crochets, whatever you want to do. We're essentially making one first round of a flat circle. And I'm not even going to count my stitches to make sure I have like the quote right amount. I'm just going to slip stitch back over here to my first stitch. And we have a small little circle. Snip the yarn, pull that through, and then we're going to weave in the end that's coming off the outside. And this will be inside the hat. It'll never be seen, so feel free to be as sloppy as you like with weaving in the ends. But I'll just quickly weave my ends in around one side, and then we'll go back the other direction just to make sure that doesn't come loose. Okay. And then we can just snip that. So now we have our long end that came from the center. I'm going to take our hat, put that, I guess we'll call it a crocheted button, in the middle of the hat. Take your long end that you've made and sew it on here. I'm going to kind of go around these stitches in a similar way to the way I did when I was weaving in the ends. But I think I'm going to go maybe a bit outside of those stitches to start with. And I'm just going to go, through a couple of stitches here, and then maybe back up through the middle of my button. Through a couple of stitches here. Finding this a little bit challenging to do, keeping it as flat as I can on the table. Apparently when I do this in real life, I put it right up under my nose so I can see what I'm doing. But it did come out a bit crooked. But essentially, you're going to sew that little button into place, weave in your end, snip off the excess. Then you're going to take your pom-pom, put your crochet hook through the middle, kind of out through the side of your button. Oops, just did that backward. your hook going up to the outside. Grab the loop on your pom-pom, pull it through. If you pulled your hole at the beginning really tight, you might go grab a smaller crochet hook. But then just loop your loop off of your pom-pom around that button a couple times like a ponytail holder. That'll hold your pom-pom on while leaving a soft button on the inside that hopefully will not irritate any sensitive scalps. And thank you so much for joining me for this video on the Arcturus hat. I hope you enjoyed it. If you make a project, please feel free to leave a link to your Instagram or your Ravelry page or wherever you're sharing your project, because I would love to see it.